Hello friends, in this screencast we are going to talk about stock valuation, and within stock valuation we are going to focus on the dividend capitalization approach. We know that within dividend capitalization approach we have three cases. One is the oversimplified scenario where we don't allow the dividends to grow at all, that is the zero growth model. Then we have the second one, the constant growth model, and then we have the third one, variable growth model, and that is what we are going to emphasize on in this screencast. For the purpose of applying the variable growth rate model, we have assumed some data here. We have an estimate of the current dividend, which is D0, $3.40. Then we have an estimate of the first growth rate, which is equal to 0, and that would last for the next year. So that means, since the growth rate, this one is 0, the dividend that we are going to get at the end of the first period is going to be the same as the dividend that we are getting now, that is $3.40. Then we have an estimate of the second growth rate here, G2, which is equal to 5% per annum, and that is going to be applicable for years number 2 and 3. Then another growth rate is there, G3, which is equal to 15%, and that would be applicable to year number 4. And from year number 5 onwards, we have another growth rate, G4, which is going to be equal to 10%. For the purpose of discounting, we have our required return estimate, 14%. So this entire process of finding out the value of the stock or the price of the stock is going to be a 4-step procedure. Let us get on to step number 1 and step number 2. Step number 1 and 2 are to find out the value of cash dividends first, that is your step number 1, and then once you have the value of your cash dividends, you go ahead and find out the present value of those annual dividends, that is step number 2. So let us quickly find out the value of dividend in the first period. So we begin with the estimate of D0, which is given to us here, $3.40. So let us just write it here, $3.40, and since the growth rate in the first year is going to be 0, we are going to be getting exactly the same amount in this period also as we got in time period 0, that is $3.40. So to keep this value same, $3.40, we simply multiply it by 1 and write here $3.40. Now let us go ahead and find out the value of cash dividend in time period 2. For time period 2, if you look here at the data, time period 2, the growth rate is going to be 5%. So let us write here $3.40 and multiply it by 1.05, and that is going to return us a value of $3.57. So that was simple. Now we go ahead to dividend in the time period number 3. So dividend in time period 2 was $3.57. Let's write it here, $3.57. And what is the growth rate applicable for the third period? For the third period here, look, the growth rate applicable is 5%. So we again do the same thing here, multiply by 1.05, and that is going to give us a value of $3.75. Then let us go ahead to the fourth period. So we write down here the dividend of the third period, that is $3.75, which we found here, and then multiply this thing by the growth rate, 1 plus the growth rate of the fourth period. What is the growth rate in the fourth period? Look here, year number 4, the growth rate is 15%. So let's multiply this thing by 1.15. When we do that, we are going to get an estimate of $4.31. So we have completed step number 1. We have found out the value of cash dividends for each of the 4 years, D1, D2, D3, D4. Now the second step is to find out the present value of these dividends. For that purpose, we make a neat little table here. The first column here is filled, 1, 2, 3, 4 time periods, and then we just copy and paste our dividends from here, these ones, into this column. So let us write here $3.40. In this cell, let's write $3.57. In this column, this cell, let's write $3.75, and then the last one, $4.31. Now we know that our discount rate is 14%. That is our required rate of return given here. So that is why the heading of this column is present value interest factor of $1 at the rate of 14% and tth period. So t, for example, in this row will be 1. So what we are going to do is we are going to go to our time value tables, the present value interest factor of $1, and look for the present value interest factor of $1 at 14% for the first period, and we are going to write it here. If you go there, you are going to find the value of the factor as 0.877. The value of the factor at 14% for the second year is going to be 0.769. For the third period, the value of the factor is going to be 0.675. And for the fourth period, it's going to be 0.592. Now we have this column to fill. This column here is the product of the previous two columns, that is this one here and this one here. So the value in this cell is going to be $3.40 multiplied by 0.877, and that product is going to give you $2.98. The next product will be $2.75. Let's also fill in the remaining two cells. $2.53 and then $2.55. So what we are going to do is we are going to now find out the total present value of dividends over the entire period, and for that we need to add up all these values. So the sum of this column here, let us write it, $10.81, and this is one part of our solution which we are going to store away for later use. Now let us proceed to step number 3. Step number 3 takes us to a constant growth rate, which is this one, 10%, and it's going to remain constant from year number 5 onwards. So when the growth rate is going to be constant, our formula for finding out the price is going to be this here, this formula. Let's look at the heading of step 3 first. We have to find out the present value of what? Of the price of stock when at the end of initial growth period. So the initial growth period ends at period number 4. So what we need to do is we need to find out, first of all, price of the stock at the end of period number 4. Remember, this step is to find out the present value of the price of the stock. But first of all, we have to find out the price of the stock. Only then we can find out its present value. So let's first of all figure out what is the price of the stock at the end of the initial growth period. So price at the end of the initial growth period, that is price at the end of period number 4, is going to be equal to this D5 divided by K minus G. So now, in order for us to use this formula, we need an estimate of D5. So let us quickly find out D5 first. We already have an estimate of D4, this one here, $4.31. So let us write it here, $4.31. And times, what we need to do, we need to multiply this by 1 plus the growth rate applicable. Which growth rate is going to be applicable? We are finding out the dividends for year number 5. And we know that the growth rate from year number 5 onwards is 10%. So let's just write here 1 plus the growth rate, that is 1 plus 0.10 is going to become 1.10. So if we find this product, we are going to end up with $4.74. So now this D5, then we can now use in this equation. We can substitute the value here. So let us do it quickly. Start the bracket. For D5, let us write this value, 4.74, and this 4.74 is going to be divided by the difference between the required rate of return K and our growth rate that is applicable for this period. So the required rate of return has been given to us here. Look at it here, 14%. So let us incorporate that into our equation. 14%, let's write 0.14, and then minus G, the growth rate. The growth rate applicable in this part of our timeline is 10% because we are in the 5th year and onwards. So let us write here 0.10. Let us put these guys in small brackets and then close the full square bracket. So what is going to be the price at the end of the 4th period? If you solve this equation, you are going to get 118.5. So that is the price that we have at the end of the 4th period. So what we have done is we have found out this thing, price of the stock at the end of the initial growth period. Now what we need to do to complete step number 3 of this item, we need to find out the present value, because we want to find out the value of the stock at the moment, not at the end of period number 4. That's why we discount this number here 4 periods backward so that it becomes the current value. That's why we write here PV of stock price. How do we do that? Now this is a lump sum amount. Let's write it here, 118.5. And if we want to discount it, we need to multiply this thing by present value interest factor of 14% again. That is our discount rate. And for how many periods? We need to take this back 4 periods. So let's write 4 periods here. So let us go back to the tables again. 118.5 times the present value interest factor of PVIF of 14% for 4 periods. We have already located that value. We wrote it here, 0.592. So let's just copy and paste it from there, 0.592. So the present value of your stock price at the end of the initial growth period becomes, if you take this product, you're going to find $70.15. Now, step number 4 is very simple. We have to add 2 things. Which 2 things? The present value of dividends during the initial growth period, which is this, and the present value of price at the end of the growth period, which is this. So let us just write it here quickly. $10.81, which are coming from here, and plus $70.15, which are coming from here, and let us add them together to get $80.96. That becomes your P0. So let's just write here P0. P0 is equal to this. So let me put it in subscript here. So this becomes your P0, $80.96. Thank you very much.